Star Trek, Deep Space Nine, Gypsy World. Chapter 1. Jake stared at the man. He knew that it was rude, but he couldn't help it. He had never seen a Fjori before. The Fjori was big and possessed a heavy beard. His face was tanned and scarred from the burning rays of 100 suns and the winds of 1,000 worlds. His clothes were loose-fitting, yet he wore them with the same pride that Jake's father wore his Starfleet dress uniform. Commander Benjamin Sisko nudged his son, and Jake quickly averted his eyes as the man approached. Sisko offered his hand in a greeting. "Welcome to Deep Space Nine, Captain Vardak. I'm Commander Sisko. This is my son, Jake." Captain Gerald Vardak of the Star Trader Orak accepted Sisko's handshake with a firm grip. He nodded at Jake. "I appreciate your allowing us the use of your repair facilities, Commander." "Deep Space Nine is here to accommodate any ship traveling through the Bajoran wormhole." "Even a Fjori ship?" Sisko smiled. "My own ancestors suffered centuries of prejudice on old Earth. We have that in common." Vardak nodded, then added, "But you, at least, no longer have to endure the wrath of your fellows." "As long as a Fjori choose to remain outside the system, there will be those who distrust you." "You are right, of course, but the people of the Orak, like the Gypsies of your own planet, are destined to be nomads, to forever wander the starways." "If that is your choice." "That is how it has been since the beginning of our history. It cannot be otherwise." Vardak spoke as though it were an undisputed truth, which to him it was. With that, the captain of the Orak turned and walked away. He was almost to the airlock when he stopped, turned, and looked back at Sisko. "I suggest that for your peace of mind as well as my own, you put this docking bay off limits while we are here." "I've already ordered that," Sisko replied. "You have my word that you will not be disturbed while you and your family are guests on Deep Space Nine." Jake watched Captain Vardak disappear around a corner, then he turned to his father. "Does that mean we can't visit the Fjori ship?" "I'm afraid it does, Jake. The Fjori are a very private people, and I want to honor their wishes. Docking Bay 7 is off limits to everyone while they are here." He gave Jake a sharp look. "That applies to you and your friend Nog." Even though it was the weekend, as soon as Jake left his father, he headed for the space station's school. Actually, to call it a school was charitable. Keiko O'Brien had converted an empty shop into a classroom complete with personal computers for the half-dozen station children who were her students. Jake had initially complained to his father that putting the little kids in the same class as the teenagers like Nog and himself was not really proper, but Benjamin Sisko had explained that one-room schoolhouses had been the norm in the frontier days on Earth, and Deep Space Nine was definitely the frontier in the 24th century. Like most things his father told him, Jake accepted it, then went on to research the subject on his own. Usually he found that his father was right. At the moment, what Jake was interested in researching was the Fjori. He set his computer to the task and waited for the results. He did not have long to wait. "Search complete," the feminine voice of the computer proclaimed. Jake had once asked his father why most computer voices were female. His father thought about it a moment, then replied that it might be because the voice of a woman seemed less threatening than that of a man. Since computers in their early years were strange and even frightening to many people, perhaps they were given the more comforting voice of a woman. It made sense to Jake. Even now, when he remembered the soft voice of his mother, bad times were easier to endure. "Display results," Jake commanded the computer. A holographic star map materialized in the front of the room. Jake recognized it as Gamma Quadrant. He expected to see colored dots of light superimposed over the map to represent the Fjori starships in the quadrant, but there were no dots. "Where are the Fjori ships?" he asked. "The number of Fjori in the charted universe is not known, since only a few have passed through the wormhole in the 2 years of its operation," the computer reported. "There is insufficient statistical records in the data files upon which to make a reliable estimate." "Why's that?" Jake asked. "Fjori are nomadic. No record exists of their colonizing a planet, owning a territory, forming a government, or fighting a war," No official records exist because the Fjori themselves have never submitted to a census. In other words, Jake summed up, they don't talk about themselves. Correct, the computer confirmed. There is no reliable data on the Fjori in the files. There must be something. The star map changed to focus on a cluster of stars and on a particular star near the outer edge of the galactic cluster. Is that the Fjori homeworld? He asked. It is a simulation based on legends and folktales, replied the computer. There is no verified record of the location of their home planet. It is not certain that it still exists. It is believed that after centuries of wandering across their planet, with the advent of the starship, they migrated to the remote regions of space. Here they continued their nomadic ways. They became traders, traveling from world to world, venturing out to the farthest regions of the universe. Their starships, like their wagons of previous centuries, are their only real homes. Computer, shut up. Sorry. Computer, shut up! The computer obeyed and the star map vanished. Jake turned to face the interruption, his Ferengi friend Nog. Why'd you do that? Jake wanted to know. Because if you want to know all about Fjori, you're not going to find it in some musty database. Oh, so you're an expert on the subject. I am. Nog flashed a broad smile, the way he did when he was particularly pleased with himself. In fact, I know quite a bit about the Fjori that isn't even in the computer. Jake had learned to take Nog's boasts with more than a grain of salt. Such as, he challenged. Nog stepped close and put his arm around Jake's shoulder, the way he'd seen his Uncle Quark do when he was about to sell some unsuspecting spacer a share in a Durellian mine in the Lost Quadrant. I know the way to the secret Fjori homeworld. There was a long pause. Jake broke the silence. Well, are you going to tell me? There was another pause before Nog smiled. For a price. Chapter 2. It was crowded on the promenade. 7 ships were in port besides the Aurak, and the shops were busy, and no place was busier than Quark's, as usual. Jake and Nog weren't allowed inside, of course, but they could observe most of the action from one of the kiosks, the small open booths that overlooked the main concourse. I've never heard of the Fjori world, Jake said as he munched on his jumja, otherwise referred to by the locals as glop on a stick. Are you naive or are you naive? Nog commented. He had already finished his own snack, the price he had demanded for his information. For a moment, he contemplated trying for a second glop, but thought better of it. Jake was an easy mark, but he was also just about the only real friend that Nog had. The Fjori world is a secret planet where Fjori go once every 5 years for their gathering. If it's a secret, Jake wondered, how do you know where it is? Nog leaned over and whispered, I don't actually know exactly where it is, but I know how to find out. How? The Fjori star maps. Oh, you're just going to walk up to Captain Vardic and ask him to show you their maps? Well, not exactly. There is another way. Jake knew what that was. You're not going to try to steal them. Nog feigned shock at such a notion. Steal? No, just sneak a quick look. Don't even think about it, Jake cautioned. My dad's put the Fjori docking bay off limits. Nog leaned back in his chair and said nothing. Jake knew perfectly well that his Ferengi friend was plotting to get into docking bay 7, and he was determined not to get involved in another of Nog's schemes. Nog saw the situation somewhat differently. As a people, Ferengi were not normally bound by rules. In fact, they generally considered the only reason to have a rule was so that a Ferengi could break it. On the other hand, even his Uncle Quark found it unwise to go against Benjamin Sisko. The station commander was a fair man, unless his rules were violated. Then his wrath was terrible enough to intimidate even a Klingon. On the other hand, Nog knew that his status in the eyes of his uncle and the other Ferengis would soar if he acquired those Fjori star maps. and he knew there would be an opportunity. Nog only hoped he had the brains to see it and the courage to grasp it. For the moment, Nog turned his attention to the evening's activity on the promenade, where the opportunity the young Ferengi wanted was about to happen. That opportunity wore the olive-skinned looks and the colorful tunic of a Fjori trader. His name, as they would learn, was Kala, and he was only a few years older than Jake or Nog. He was trying to grow a beard, as did most male Fjori, but so far the attempt had not been particularly successful. It was doubtful that he was old enough to be in Quarks, but the enterprising Ferengi barkeeper was never one to ask questions when it might cost him a paying customer. Kala took a stool at the end of the bar next to a heavy-set Bulgani miner. That was his first mistake. He tried to start a conversation with the Bulgani. That was his second mistake. Bulganis are not known as a social species. You would not invite a Bulgani to a formal dinner party, Jake thought. He would be very unhappy, and you would be even unhappier. Jake and Nog were watching all this from the kiosk. They couldn't hear what the Fjori was saying, but Nog whispered to Jake that he knew what the Fjori was trying to do. Nog added with a smile that he had tried to do it himself more than once. If there's one thing about the Fjori that earns them a grudging respect from the Ferengi, it is their ability to pull a con. Unfortunately, as Nog was about to observe, this particular Fjori, though full of youthful enthusiasm, lacked the professionalism of a true master of the art. While Nog watched, anticipating what was about to come, Kala finally got the attention of the miner. Or, to be more exact, it was a trio of cloud crystals that Kala poured from a leather pouch onto the bar. Their beauty and their value was enough to attract the attention of even a hardened Bulgani miner. 10 strips of gold latinum, Kala said, naming his price. The Bulgani grunted. These are stolen! They are not. My grandfather gave them to me just before he died. They are family treasures. Then why do you sell them? Because I must, Kala sighed. I have a small sister to care for. She is sickly, and I have no money for doctors. He touched the nearest of the 3 crystals. These are all I have. The Bulgani looked at the crystals while trying to hide his emotions, but Nog knew what he must be thinking, that they were worth much more than 10 gold latinum, and he was certain that the Fjori had stolen them. For a moment, he might have even considered calling the station's security guards, but that moment passed quickly. If the Fjori had stolen them from somewhere else, then it was only right that he steal them from the Fjori. 5 gold latinum, was the Bulgani's offer. You have me at a disadvantage, Kala whimpered. You know I must sell them, so you attempt to cheat me. The Bulgani lifted one of the crystals. The game was afoot. Perhaps 6 latinum. Kala snatched the crystal from the Bulgani's thick paw and picked up the other 2 from the bar. He put all 3 back into their pouch and stood up as though he were going to leave. I am sorry to have taken up your time. The Bulgani was hooked. All right. I have only 8 latinum. Kala hesitated. He began to put the pouch away, hesitated again. Then he sat down and laid the pouch on the bar in front of the Bulgani. Let me see your money. The Bulgani took out a stack of shiny latinum strips and placed them on the bar next to the pouch. Kala counted them. 8 exactly. I should not accept this, but I desperately need the money. Kala stuffed the bars into his inner pocket. He started to push the crystals toward the Bulgani, but in the process he knocked over a glass of Bjorn's sand beer. The Bulgani instinctively jumped to avoid being splashed, and Kala seized the distraction to switch the bag on the bar with another that was hidden in his jacket. That was his 3rd mistake. Quark had seen the switch but considered it none of his business. If the Bulgani was that stupid, he deserved to lose his money. Quark retreated to the far end of the bar. However, a Bajoran shopkeeper who had also witnessed the switch and who did consider it his business stepped forward. He reasoned that if the Bulgani lost all his money, he would have none to spend in his own shop. Kala began to leave, but the Bajoran grabbed him by the shoulder and reached in the Fjori's inner pocket and removed the other pouch. Nog nudged Jake. Come on, this is our opportunity. Jake wasn't quite sure what Nog was talking about, but he followed his Ferengi friend, although he was certain Nog was going to lead them into trouble, which is just what he did. The Bulgani became furious when he realized he'd been cheated. He pulled Kala away from the Bajoran. It was clear that his immediate intent was to rip Kala apart piece by piece. It was also clear that most of the crowd in Quarks welcomed this bit of live entertainment. But Kala, like most Fjori, had been in scrapes before. He yanked the Bolgani's money from his pocket and tossed the latinum strips into the crowd, where everyone scrambled to retrieve them. The Bolgani, seeing his fortune being snatched up by greedy strangers, loosened his grip on Kala. "That's my money!" he shouted as he plunged into the crowd. Kala turned, grabbed the pouch that he knew contained the real crystals, and dashed out of the place, knocking Jake over in the process. Now the station's security guards arrived and began to restore order. The sad but wiser Bolgani miner was able to recover only half of his money. Jake picked himself up and went out onto the promenade. He found Nog waiting for him, wearing a broad smile. "What are you so happy about?" Jake wanted to know. Nog led his friend to a dark corner, then revealed the cause of his happiness. Nog held the other pouch in his hand. He opened it and revealed 3 cloud crystals, the real ones.
"There isn't a Fjori alive who can outcon a Ferengi," he said proudly.
"You can't keep them, Nog." Nog replaced the crystals in the pouch.
"You're right. That would be stealing."
He tossed the pouch to Jake.
"We must return them to the Fjori."
Which is how Jake found himself reluctantly crawling behind Nog through an air duct that led to the docking ring. He agreed with Nog that they had an obligation to return the cloud crystals. He did not agree that this was the way to go about it. But as they peered through the grill into the dimly lit docking bay, it was a little late to turn back. Jake looked over Nog's shoulder and saw that the docking bay was deserted, except for some activity near the airlock. There he could see several Fjori men and women busily working on the Orak's navigational computer module. They had removed the unit from the ship and linked it to the docking bay's diagnostic system for testing. Nog saw the situation as a stroke of luck. If he could get over there without being seen, he might gain access to the navigational star charts. In his pocket was a small data recorder he had borrowed from his Uncle Quark's office. Nog carefully removed the grill and pulled it inside the duct. The ease with which he accomplished the task informed Jake that his Ferengi friend had done this before. Quietly, Nog slipped from the duct onto the docking bay, hiding himself behind some crates. He turned and waved for Jake to follow. Then the young Ferengi silently vanished into the shadows. Jake lowered himself from the duct's opening onto the hard floor, wondering just how he had been talked into this. It was easy enough to blame it on Nog, but he knew that a con artist can really only con someone who wants to be conned. Jake had wanted to visit the Fjori ship, and Nog provided a convenient excuse. Jake took a few cautious steps, trying to remain in the shadows, then stopped. He wasn't sure just what to do next. Walk up to the first Fjori he saw and introduce himself? Well, he asked himself, why not? Jake touched the bulge in his pocket where he had stashed the crystals. After all, he did have a reason to be here. But before he could take another step, he felt something cold and sharp press against the back of his neck.
"Hold it right there, Gacho,"